This is not a video about the Caribbean. This is a recorded failure of geography itself. File 01, a capital city that exists in law, but has had zero human life for decades. File 02, a stretch of ocean that no country can fully claim, because its borders shift faster than maps can update. File 03, an island that disappeared after a hurricane, then reappeared years later like nothing ever erased it. At this point, maps are no longer accurate. They are just delayed evidence of a place that refuses to stay the same. And by fact 40, you'll understand why parts of the Caribbean are not considered stable geography. They are considered unfinished reality. Fact 1, beneath the Caribbean's most popular cruise routes, volcanoes are erupting right now, and no one on the ships above them knows it. The Lesser Antilles arc has multiple active submarine volcanic systems erupting along the subduction boundary between the Atlantic and Caribbean plates. These aren't geological footnotes. Several have erupted multiple times in the last 50 years, some as recently as this decade. The seafloor beneath Caribbean tourism routes is one of the most volcanically active corridors in the Western Hemisphere. The world's most photographed sea sits directly above it. Fact 2, one island in the Caribbean is legally two countries at the same time, and the border between them was reportedly decided by a foot race. St. Martin/Sint Maarten divides 87 square kilometers between France and the Netherlands. According to the founding legend, French and Dutch colonists settled the boundary by walking from opposite ends of the island and splitting the territory where they met. The border is real, legally binding, and still in effect, the result of human endurance, not topography. Two currencies, two legal systems, two emergency services, separated by a road sign on an island you could drive across in 15 minutes. Fact 3, one Caribbean island is geologically not from the Caribbean at all, and the continent it left behind never fully released it. Trinidad sits on the South American plate, not the Caribbean plate. As recently as 10,000 years ago, it was physically attached to Venezuela, dry land, where there is now open water. The strait between Trinidad and Venezuela, the Serpent's Mouth, is so shallow that a sea level drop of only 11 meters would reconnect them. Trinidad is politically Caribbean. Geologically, it's South America, with water temporarily in between. Fact 4, one Caribbean nation's official capital city has been buried alive for nearly 30 years, and it is still legally the capital. Plymouth, Montserrat's designated capital, was destroyed by pyroclastic flows from Soufriere Hills volcano in 1997 and has never been excavated. Government buildings, roads, clocks, all frozen under meters of volcanic debris. The government operates from a different town, but no legislation has formally moved the capital. Plymouth still appears on official documents. A sovereign territory exists, right now, today. With a legal capital you cannot enter without hazmat equipment. This is not a footnote, it is current law. Fact 5, Barbados geologically shouldn't exist alongside the other Caribbean islands, and the reason why breaks the logic of the entire island chain. Every island in the Eastern Caribbean arc is volcanic, built from magma pushed up by subduction. Barbados is the only one composed almost entirely of compressed ocean sediment and limestone, because it formed as an accretionary wedge scraped from the subducting Atlantic seafloor. Barbados didn't erupt from the ocean. It was slowly scraped up and pushed above the surface by tectonic forces acting on a different plate entirely. Same sea, same culture, completely different geological origin. Barbados is an alien in its own island chain. Fact 6, the Caribbean Sea doesn't just experience weather. It exports the weather system that prevents Western Europe from resembling Canada. Warm Caribbean waters feed the Gulf Stream, the ocean current that carries tropical heat northward along the Atlantic seaboard and across to northwestern Europe. Without the Caribbean's sustained heat generation, the Gulf Stream weakens. Without the Gulf Stream, northern Europe's climate becomes significantly colder, comparable to Canadian latitudes at the same degree of longitude. The Caribbean is a climate engine. It regulates the temperature of a continent on the other side of the ocean. Remove it, and Europe changes permanently. Fact 7, Cuba is so geographically large that it makes the rest of the Caribbean feel like a cartographic rounding error. Cuba's landmass is larger than all other Caribbean islands combined. It contains mountain ranges exceeding 1,900 meters, rivers, marshlands, deserts, and ecosystems that span every tropical biome. It's closer in scale to Portugal than to what most people imagine when they hear the word island. The image of the Caribbean as a scattering of small tropical dots is a myth Cuba alone invalidates. When people say the Caribbean, they're describing a region dominated by a single massive island that contains nearly all of the region's geographic complexity. The rest are its footnotes. The Caribbean doesn't have one geology, it has at least 5, and they don't agree with each other. FAF 8, directly beside one of the most visited islands on Earth, is a hole in the ocean so deep it has never been fully explored. The Puerto Rico Trench sits just 75 kilometers north of the island of Puerto Rico. At its deepest point, the Milwaukee Deep, it reaches 8,376 meters below sea level, making it the deepest point in the Atlantic Ocean. The continental shelf ends and the trench begins within a horizontal distance you could jog in a morning. The transition from reef to abyss is not gradual. It is a cliff. Puerto Rico is simultaneously a vacation destination and the edge of the Atlantic's deepest void. These two realities coexist on the same map, and most people have never considered what that means. FAF 9, Haiti and the Dominican Republic share the same island, but geography gave them two entirely different futures, and human decisions made those futures permanent. Hispaniola is divided by a central mountain range that acts as a meteorological barrier. The Dominican Republic's windward eastern side receives consistent rainfall and grew extensive forests. Haiti's leeward western side receives significantly less rainfall, and then large-scale deforestation destroyed what little vegetation remained. The Dominican Republic retains roughly 40% forest cover. Haiti retains approximately 1–2%. Different erosion rates, different water security, different agricultural potential. On the same island, under the same sun, one mountain range shaped two nations. The Caribbean doesn't need political borders to divide people. It uses ridgelines. FAF 10, the Caribbean contains a sea within the sea, one that has no coastline, no shore, and no nation has ever been able to legally claim. The Sargasso Sea is defined entirely by 4 surrounding ocean currents: the Gulf Stream, the North Atlantic Current, the Canary Current, and the North Atlantic Equatorial Current. It has no land boundary anywhere. It is a real, named, scientifically documented sea, but you cannot draw its border with a coastline because it has none. Its edges move with the currents that contain it. Ships have historically become stranded in its slow clockwise gyre. Nations debate who governs it. No country's territorial waters include it. It exists unmistakably and belongs to no one. FAF 11, beneath the Caribbean Sea, there are mountain ranges taller than the Alps, actively spreading apart on the ocean floor right now. The Mid-Cayman Spreading Center in the Cayman Trough hosts some of the deepest known hydrothermal vent systems on Earth, with water temperatures exceeding 400 cc at the vent mouths. The seafloor here is not static. It is being generated at this ridge while simultaneously being consumed at the subduction zones to the east and west. The Caribbean Basin is both being created and destroyed in real time. The Caribbean floor is a geological treadmill. The seafloor beneath it is being produced, transported, and swallowed, and the process has been running for millions of years without stopping. Fact 12, there is a piece of Europe in the middle of the Caribbean, and it's not a colony. It is constitutionally, legally part of the European Union. Martinique and Guadeloupe are French overseas regions, constitutional parts of France, and therefore full outermost regions of the EU. EU law applies. The euro is the currency. European courts hold jurisdiction. These territories grow mangoes, experience hurricane seasons, and sit in the tropics surrounded by independent island nations. They are also EU border zones. The external borders of the European Union extend into the Caribbean Sea. One of the world's largest political unions has its territory scattered across a sea that most Europeans have never visited. FAF 13, a submarine volcano north of Grenada, has been quietly building a new Caribbean island for decades, and geologists are watching to see when it surfaces. Kikum-Jenny is an active underwater volcano approximately 8 kilometers north of Grenada. It has erupted more than a dozen times since 1939, stands roughly 1,300 meters above the ocean floor, and has a summit approximately 180 meters below the ocean surface. At its current rate of growth and eruptive frequency, its summit could theoretically breach the ocean surface within a human lifetime. A new island added to the map. In our time, the Caribbean is still generating land. The map of this region is not finished. FAFT 14 in 2017, an entire island nation was evacuated, and for the first time in over 300 years, it had 0 human inhabitants. Hurricane Irma struck Barbuda with sustained winds near 295 km/h in September 2017, destroying or severely damaging 95% of the island's structures. All 1,800 residents were evacuated to Antigua. The island was emptied. Barbuda had been continuously inhabited since at least the 17th century. A single storm created the first total depopulation in its recorded history. The government debated whether rebuilding was geographically rational. People returned. The question of whether small island nations can survive increasingly intense hurricane seasons was never answered. It was just postponed. FAFT 15, the Caribbean Sea doesn't just generate storms, it is an amplification system that can take a weak tropical system and turn it into a record breaker within 48 hours. The loop current circulates warm water through the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico, maintaining in that hurricanes draw from as they pass over it. Rapid intensification, defined as a hurricane gaining 35 plus mph in wind speed within 24 hours, occurs disproportionately when storms cross the loop current's path. The energy is there, the storms find it. The Caribbean Sea is not a passive stage for weather events. It is an active participant that builds the conditions for its own worst disasters, season after season, with no off switch. FAFT 16, the Caribbean plate is being pushed, pulled, compressed, and torn from 4 different directions simultaneously, and it has nowhere to go. The Caribbean plate is bordered by the North American plate to the north, the South American plate to the south, and the Cocos and Nazca plates to the west. All 4 are in motion. All 4 exert active force on a plate roughly the size of the Caribbean basin itself. For a plate this size, the number of active tectonic boundaries is unusually high. Most comparably sized plates have 1 or 2 active margins. Every island above it, every city on those islands, every person in those cities, all of them live on a geological structure being attacked from every direction with no mechanism for relief. FAFT 17, several Caribbean navigational charts point ships toward land that no longer exists. Low-lying sandy cays throughout the Bahamas, Turks and Caicos, and shallow water Caribbean zones have shifted position, dramatically shrunk, or been permanently submerged due to combinations of storm activity, erosion, and sea level rise. Chart updates lag behind reality, sometimes by years. GPS coordinates can route a vessel to the precise location of a cay that is now permanently 30 centimeters underwater. Caribbean geography is moving faster than the systems built to track it. The maps are not wrong by negligence. The land is wrong by physics. FAFT 18, the limestone hills of many Caribbean islands are made of ancient ocean floor, seafloor that is now standing hundreds of meters above sea level. Much of the bedrock beneath Caribbean limestone islands, parts of the Bahamas, Cuba, and Barbados, consist of ancient marine carbonate deposited on the ocean floor and then pushed upward by tectonic forces over millions of years. Marine fossils are embedded in cliff faces hundreds of meters above current sea level, remnants of an ocean floor that became a mountain. The material didn't change, the elevation did. When you stand on a Caribbean hilltop, you are standing on compressed ancient ocean. The land is made of sea. It always was. FAFT 19, the 2010 Haiti earthquake didn't just collapse a city, it ruptured a fault system that runs directly beneath one of the hemisphere's most densely populated corridors, and that fault system is still accumulating pressure. The magnitude 7.0 earthquake activated fault structures associated with the Enriquillo Plantain Garden Fault Zone, a major strike-slip boundary analogous in behavior to California's San Andreas Fault, running east-west directly through southern Haiti. Port-au-Prince was built on top of it. The rupture in 2010 released strain that had accumulated for over 200 years. Adjacent sections of the fault system remain locked, meaning pressure is still building along the same boundary. The earthquake was not a random event, it was a geological debt paid after 2 centuries of accumulation. The Caribbean collects these debts quietly and then pays them all at once. FAFT 20, if you dropped Mount Everest into the Puerto Rico Trench, it would disappear completely with room to spare. The Milwaukee Deep, the lowest point in the Puerto Rico Trench, sits at 8,376 meters below sea level. Mount Everest stands at 8,849 meters above sea level. The difference between them is only 473 meters. That margin would leave Everest's summit, the single highest point on the entire surface of the land Earth, fully submerged, invisible, unreachable. A mountain that takes elite climbing teams weeks to summit would be underwater and you would never know it was there. Puerto Rico is a vacation island. 75 kilometers away is a void in the Earth's crust that could swallow the tallest mountain on land and give you no sign it happened. The Caribbean holds both of these realities side by side, and no one finds that remarkable. Fact 21, there is a Caribbean airport where commercial jets had to descend over a public beach at near rooftop level, not because of poor design, but because the island's geometry left no other option. Princess Juliana International Airport on St. Martin was positioned at the end of Maho Beach because the island is too narrow and too mountainous for a standard approach corridor. Aircraft descended directly over sunbathers at altitudes below 20 meters. The approach became one of the world's most famous aviation spectacles, and the reason it existed was entirely geological. The island refused to provide clearance. The planes came anyway. The Caribbean doesn't renegotiate with geography. It builds on top of it and then adjusts human behavior to match the terrain. The next 9 facts are not about what the Caribbean is, they are about what it does. Fact 22, the Eastern Caribbean island chain is one of the most densely volcanic corridors in the Western Hemisphere, and it is not finished forming. The Lesser Antilles Arc, running from Saba in the north to Grenada in the south, was created by the ongoing subduction of the Atlantic plate beneath the Caribbean plate. That process never stopped. Volcanoes in Dominica, St. Kitts, Guadeloupe, St. Vincent, and Martinique remain active. These aren't islands that erupted once millions of years ago and became stable land masses. They are mid-formation volcanic systems in an arc still being actively generated by a subduction boundary that has been running for tens of millions of years. The Eastern Caribbean islands are not finished being built. Part of the building process is eruption. The construction is ongoing. Fact 23, Hurricane Maria in 2017 didn't just devastate Puerto Rico, it physically altered the shape of the island. Maria's catastrophic rainfall, some areas recorded over 750 millimeters in 24 hours, triggered more than 70,000 landslides across Puerto Rico's mountainous interior. Slopes stable for centuries were stripped bare. River channels migrated to new positions. Coastlines that had held for decades shifted measurably. Post-storm topographic surveys recorded terrain that was quantifiably different from pre-storm surveys. Maria is described in news archives as a weather event. In geological terms, it was a terrain modification event. A storm permanently changed the shape of an island of 3 million people and then moved on. Fact 24, a Caribbean volcano once killed 30,000 people in under 2 minutes, and the ruins of their city are still there. Mount Pelée on Martinique erupted on May 8, 1902, releasing a pyroclastic surge, a superheated, high-velocity cloud of gas, ash, and volcanic debris that traveled down the slope at over 160 kilometers per h toward the city of Saint-Pierre. Saint-Pierre had 30,000 inhabitants and was known as the Paris of the Caribbean. The surge reached the city in approximately 90 seconds. Survival was near impossible. Only a handful of people made it out. Saint-Pierre's ruins still stand. You can walk through stone buildings destroyed by a 700 degrees Celsius gas cloud. The Caribbean has its own Pompeii, and the volcano that created it is still classified as active. Fact 25, in April 2021, a Caribbean island was geographically cut off from the rest of the world by its own geology. Le Soufriere volcano on St. Vincent erupted explosively on April 9, 2021 for the first time in 42 years. Volcanic ash blanketed the entire northern third of the island within hours. The airport was buried and non-functional. With roads in the north destroyed and the airport out of operation, the only way to evacuate 16,000 residents from the danger zone was by sea, using a regional flotilla of ships that assembled under emergency conditions. In 2021, a Caribbean island became completely dependent on the ocean for its survival because its own terrain made every other option physically impossible. This is not a historical cautionary tale. It happened in living memory, under modern conditions with no good alternatives. Fact 26, the force quietly destroying Caribbean coastlines isn't sea level rise alone, it's the biological collapse of the barrier that was holding the sea back. Caribbean coral reefs have declined by over 50% since the 1970s. These reefs function as natural breakwaters, dissipating wave energy before it reaches the shoreline. Without them, the same waves hit the coast at full force. As reefs die, erosion rates on unprotected Caribbean coastlines accelerate significantly. Beaches narrow, cliffs undercut. Coastlines that held their position for centuries begin to move. The death of coral is a geological event, not just a biological one. Islands don't only disappear from rising seas, they erode from within because the biological architecture protecting them has collapsed. Fact 27, the Caribbean Sea functions as a natural thermal engine that manufactures the conditions for its own worst disasters every single year, and the engine never shuts off. Caribbean Sea surface temperatures consistently remain above 26 degrees Celsius, the minimum thermal threshold for tropical storm formation. This warm water layer persists to depths of 50 meters or more in some areas, providing a deep reservoir of energy that passing storms can draw from. A hurricane moving over the Caribbean isn't drawing from a thin surface layer, it's drawing from a thermal column. Fact 28, most Caribbean nations control more ocean than land, by a factor of hundreds, and almost no map shows it. Barbados has 430 square kilometers of land. Under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, it controls over 160,000 square kilometers of exclusive economic zone, sovereign rights over fishing, mineral extraction, and resources in a vast surrounding ocean area. Barbados' maritime territory is approximately 370 times larger than its land area. The nation that appears on a map as a small dot is, legally and strategically, almost entirely underwater. Caribbean nations are ocean nations disguised as island nations. Their territory is in the water. Their power is in the sea. Standard maps have been misrepresenting their scale for centuries. The Cayman Trough reaches 7,686 meters at its deepest point, the second deepest trench in the Atlantic Ocean. It has been explored less thoroughly than the surface of the moon. Fact 29, the borders of modern Caribbean nations were not drawn by geographers. They were drawn by colonial powers based on military control, and the pirates and privateers who determined which territories could actually be held. European powers in the 17th and 18th centuries established Caribbean maritime and land boundaries through whichever territories they could militarily defend. Privateers, pirates, and naval forces controlled sea lanes that determined which islands could be claimed and held. When Caribbean nations gained independence throughout the 20th century, most inherited those colonial boundaries without renegotiation, lines drawn in London, Paris, Amsterdam, and Madrid based on 300-year-old calculations of military advantage and piratical sea control. The borders of the modern Caribbean are inheritance from an era of ships, cannons, and privateers. The ships are gone, the treaties are gone, the lines remain, and they still determine sovereignty today. Fact 30, a strong enough hurricane doesn't just destroy coastlines, it physically rearranges the ocean floor. Hurricane-force waves in the Caribbean can disturb bottom sediments at depths of 200 meters or more. After major Caribbean hurricanes, hydrographic surveys have documented measurable changes in underwater topography. Sand channels deepened, sediment banks relocated, and submarine slope profiles altered. Post-hurricane seafloor surveys following storms like Hurricane Ivan in 2004 and Maria in 2017 recorded underwater terrain that was quantifiably different from pre-storm surveys. The ocean floor in hurricane-affected zones does not return to its previous configuration. A hurricane is described as an atmospheric event. Its reach extends to the ocean floor. Every major Caribbean storm physically rebuilds part of the seafloor. The region's underwater geography changes every storm season. The hurricanes are not visitors, they are renovators. Fact 31, an island in the Caribbean is simultaneously being pushed higher by tectonic forces and eaten away by the sea, and both processes are winning in different places. Jamaica's Blue Mountains are among the most tectonically active uplifting terrains in the Caribbean, rising due to ongoing plate compression. At the same time, Jamaica's coastlines are experiencing measurable erosion, shoreline retreat, and loss of reef-protected beach systems. Two opposing geological forces are operating on the same island simultaneously, interior uplift and coastal erosion, with no equilibrium between them. The Jamaica you see today is not the Jamaica that existed 500 years ago. It will not be the Jamaica that exists 500 years from now. It is not a stable landmass. It is a landmass in mid-argument with two separate geological processes, both of which are winning. Fact 32, thousands of people in the Caribbean are currently living on land that will not physically exist by the end of this century, and they are building on it anyway. Low-lying cays in the Bahamas, Turks and Caicos, and parts of Belize sit at elevations below 1 meter above sea level. At median sea level rise projections of 0.3–1.0 meters by 2100, several inhabited areas face complete inundation on a timeline of decades. These communities are not abandoned. They are constructing new buildings, raising children, operating churches and schools on geography that has been geologically condemned by timelines that are not speculative. They are measured. The question is no longer whether the land will disappear. It is whether the people living on it will be given the resources to move before it does, or whether they will be the ones to watch it go. Fact 33, the Caribbean's tectonic situation is so geologically unusual that it defies standard classification, and scientists have been arguing about how to categorize it for decades. The Caribbean plate simultaneously borders at least 5 major tectonic structures. More than a dozen separate fault systems operate within the region. Several of those fault systems don't yet have fully agreed upon maps or formally defined boundaries in the peer-reviewed literature. Despite being one of the most studied ocean basins in the world due to its seismic history and strategic location, the Caribbean's geology contains fundamental unresolved questions that have persisted across generations of researchers. The Caribbean is not one geological story. It is 5 competing stories written simultaneously by a planet that hasn't decided how the region ends, in a place where millions of people live directly above the unresolved text. Fact 34, we have more detailed maps of the surface of Mars than we do of the Caribbean seafloor. Mars has been imaged by orbiting spacecraft at resolutions below 25 centimeters per pixel in some locations. Significant portions of the Caribbean seafloor, particularly the deep trench and basin regions, exist at mapping resolutions of 1 kilometer per pixel or worse. The technology to map ocean floors at high resolution exists. The gap is time, funding, and logistical access to deep water. Imaging Mars from orbit is operationally simpler than deploying survey vessels over thousands of kilometers of deep ocean. The substrate on which all Caribbean seismic and volcanic activity operates, the geological foundation of the entire region, is less understood than the surface of a planet 225 million kilometers away. Fact 35, Caribbean nations are not just losing land to rising seas, they are losing their legal ownership of the ocean around them, and most international law has no mechanism to stop it. Under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, maritime boundaries and exclusive economic zones are measured from coastal baseline points, fixed reference positions on a nation's shoreline. As coastlines erode and low tide elevations permanently submerge, those baseline points shift or disappear. When a baseline point disappears, the maritime boundary measured from it shrinks. A Caribbean island that loses coastal land to erosion doesn't only lose the land, it loses the corresponding ocean territory that was legally measured from that now missing shoreline. Rising seas don't just claim beaches, they erase jurisdictions. Caribbean nations are losing sovereign ocean rights, legally, measurably, in real time. The ocean is not just taking their land, it is taking their country. Some of these boundaries have already shifted. The nations don't know it yet. The sea does. Fact 36, the Caribbean Sea as it exists today is geologically recent, and it has looked completely different before, more than once. During the last glacial maximum, approximately 20,000 years ago, sea levels were roughly 120 meters lower. The islands of the Caribbean were larger. Many were connected by land bridges that are now open water. The spaces between islands were valleys, plains, and river corridors. Animals migrated between islands that are now separated by ocean. Early humans may have walked coastlines that are now 50 meters underwater. The archipelago that exists today is only the most recent configuration of a landscape that has been rearranged repeatedly. This version of the Caribbean is one iteration. Before these were islands, they were mountains and a landscape. Before that, some were ocean floor. The current configuration is not permanent, it is simply current. Fact 37, scientists have identified a Caribbean fault system capable of generating a tsunami that could strike multiple island nations simultaneously, with minutes of warning, not hours. The fault systems near northern Hispaniola, the Puerto Rico Trench Zone, and associated seismic features represent established sources for large submarine earthquakes. This is not theoretical. The 1946 Dominican Republic earthquake, magnitude 8.1, generated a tsunami that killed over 1,800 people across Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Given the geography of the Caribbean, islands clustered within 100 kilometers of each other across much of the basin, a tsunami generated in the Puerto Rico Trench Zone could reach multiple coastlines in under 30 minutes. The Pacific has a decades-old tsunami warning and evacuation infrastructure. The Caribbean's equivalent system exists but remains significantly less developed relative to the documented hazard. The fault system is real. The readiness is not proportional to it. Fact 38. The island of Saba is so geographically extreme that modern infrastructure has had to reinvent itself just to exist there, and the island still won most of the arguments. Saba is almost entirely a single stratovolcano, Mount Scenery, rising to 887 meters directly from the ocean with no flat land, no natural beach, and no natural harbor. Nothing on the island is level. Everything was built on a slope. Its commercial airport, Wancho Arauskin Airport, has a 400-meter runway, one of the shortest in the world for scheduled commercial service because the island's terrain physically cannot accommodate a longer one. The approach requires aircraft to descend between sea cliffs on both sides. Saba has no room for expansion, no beach for sea access. Every road, building, and piece of infrastructure on the island is a negotiated compromise with terrain that never stopped being volcanic. In every negotiation, the terrain had more leverage. Fact 39. The Caribbean plate is moving right now as this plays, carrying every island nation above it northeast at roughly 2 centimeters per year toward a slow-motion geological collision it will eventually lose. The Caribbean plate's northeastward movement drives it steadily into the North American plate boundary, contributing to the subduction dynamics of the eastern Caribbean and the strike-slip faulting of the north. The earthquakes, volcanoes, and trenches of the Caribbean are not random. They are symptoms of this movement. 2 centimeters per year sounds irrelevant. Over 10,000 years, that is 200 meters of displacement. Over 1 million years, 20 kilometers. The Caribbean seen on any current map will not exist in the same configuration in geological time. Caribbean island nations are not on stable ground. They are on a tectonic projectile, slow, continuous, and moving toward a geological outcome that no political map has ever acknowledged. The destination is real. The timeline is simply longer than a human life. Fact 40. The Caribbean does not have a finished geography. It never has, and it will not have one when this video ends. Right now, as this plays, a submarine volcano north of Grenada is adding material toward the ocean surface. Fault structures beneath Hispaniola are accumulating tectonic strain. Coastlines in Barbuda are retreating at measurable rates. A cay in the Turks and Caicos is incrementally shallower than it was this time last year. Limestone cliffs on Barbados are being undercut by water that has been rising for a century. No edition of any atlas has ever been accurate for the Caribbean at the moment it was printed. The region changes faster than cartography can track. Every map is a portrait of something that no longer exactly exists. A photograph of motion, presented as though it were stillness. The Caribbean is not a place the Earth finished making. It is a place the Earth is still making, with no blueprint, no announced timeline, and no final version of the map that stays true for long enough to trust completely. The maps we use are photographs of something that never stops moving. Every year, the Caribbean makes new land, loses old land, shifts coastlines, and quietly rewrites the legal boundaries of nations without asking permission, without sending notice. Geographers call it an active tectonic zone. What it actually is a place the Earth hasn't finished thinking about yet. The camera doesn't pull back to a stable image, it pulls back to something still in progress. The Caribbean is not a destination, it is a process.